John Donne today, and I don't know if we'll actually take 3 days or 3.5 days for Donne or not. Depends on if I add anything or drop anything. Sorry, I'm not feeling well today, so my brain's just completely scattered. Hopefully you saw the email extending the paper to a week from today, but nothing after that. I mean, you won't get them back probably by the final. And I am seriously thinking, and I will let you know a week from today at the latest, rather than having a final exam essay like all the other exams have been, of having an in-class exam on the day that it's scheduled. And if I do that, I will give you ahead of time, like probably next week, probably be emailed or put on D2L, a sample of what that exam would look like. Okay, I could tell you just off the bat, it would have passages to identify, and it'll only be material from the previous exam forward. So pretty much only the Renaissance stuff. So the Shakespeare sonnets, the Johnson, the Donne, and the few other poets that we have between now and then. But passages to identify, those would be passages we spent some time talking about in class. And more than likely, they would be passages of at least 3 or 4 lines, unless it's something big like, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. You know, tell me the sonnet, or tell me the author, or, you know, something like that. But also, you know, anything else course related that we've talked or I've talked about in class. I mean, not when I run off some rabbit trail and talk about, you know, politics or something like that, but you know, the historical background, that kind of stuff. Okay. Okay. So today we're starting Donne. And I know I didn't do this for Ben Jonson, but it's because I don't like Ben Jonson much, and Jonson's that's important. So, but Donne's more interesting than Jonson too. Born in 1572, dies in 1631, so he's only a few years younger than Shakespeare. 8 years younger than Shakespeare. All right. May have attended Oxford, but we're not positive. We do know he never took a degree. Okay? Probably because of the oath one had to swear upon taking that degree to the English church. Donne's family was Catholic. Your introduction mentions, you know, what happened to some of his relatives. He had a brother who was imprisoned. He had an uncle who died for Catholicism. Okay? His wife, Anne Moore, is a descendant of Thomas More, author of Utopia, and who was executed by Henry VIII because he would not go along with Henry's desire for a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Okay? I think it's Catherine. It's one of them. So, born in 1572, in the early 1590s, he took part in some wars against the Spanish when he was very young. I mean, 20, 21 and such. He writes about some of those incidents in a couple of his poems. Not the actual battle part, but being on a sailing ship, for example, during a storm. He's got a poem called The Storm, and he has another one called The Calm. And the calm is set during the doldrums. Sea still as glass and just not moving at all, etc. 1598, he goes to work as the secretary to Thomas Egerton. Egerton, you got a little bit about this in your introduction. Egerton was the Lord Keeper of the Seal. That's a pretty powerful, significant job at this time in the British Empire. The seal is the seal that Queen Elizabeth would use to affix her seal to charters and documents and all that kind of stuff. So he was the one responsible for maintaining possession of it. Not that the possession of it was ever in doubt, kind of a thing. Okay? So Egerton was pretty important. The fact that Donne at the age of 26, okay, gets this position with him, tells you Donne is on a meteoric rise. Okay, now by this time, he's already been writing poetry for at least 5 years. And he's already probably fairly well known as a poet. Excuse me, as a poet. Not because he's published anything. He hasn't published anything. Donne, in his entire lifetime, only publishes, sees into print, a handful of poems. He writes over 200 poems. Almost everything that we have of Donne is circulated in manuscript. Excuse me, in manuscript. I think I mentioned before, my dissertation was a critical edition of the Holy Sonnets of John Donne. I was working for, when I started my doctorate, I got a position working for just a TA, or research assistant, for the general editor of the Variorum edition of the poetry of John Donne. The Variorum edition, Variorum is just a shortened phrase, cum notis variorum, with notes of others. So a Variorum edition is where you have, you know, the text that you're presenting as being the most authoritative or whatever, and then the cum notis variorum with notes of others gives all the notes that other people have said about how that text came to be. In other words, commentary. So the Divine Poems volume of the Variorum edition, for example, has all of Donne's divine poems, which takes up, you know, maybe that much space in the book. And then it has this much space of commentary from the time Donne wrote the poems. Because Ben Jonson, for example, commented on some of them in private conversations. We include that material in those. So some of the poems have comments from 1600, and so that's the earliest, all the way up to within about 3 to 5 years of the final publication date of the book. Okay, where was I going with that? So the Variorum edition is based upon all known copies of Donne's poetry from his lifetime. Now, some of the poems have only one copy, which indicates Donne did not write this poem out and hand it to his friend for his friend to read. Make a copy, hand it to another friend. Make a copy, hand it to another friend. Some of the poems were proverbially kept very close to the vest. These were things probably Donne did not want circulated. Others of his poems have scores of copies. One of the manuscripts, one of the poems, I don't think it's in your book, called The Anagram, has 85 copies. It's the most copied of all of Donne's poems, and it's because it's this kind of witty thing. The Flea, which is in here, has an awful lot. It's got 40 or 50, okay? So Donne was what's called a manuscript poet. His poems were copied around and quote-unquote published that way. Now, some poems he did literally have published. You've got one in here. It's the anniversary. Where is it? It's on page 929, An Anatomy of the World, the first anniversary. Okay? Written on the death of a young lady, a young girl. Okay? And he writes this big long poem. It's like 400 lines. Okay? And he's using the death of this girl to kind of anatomize the world, what's falling apart in the world. Well, Donne says essentially everything's falling apart and such. All right? So in 1598, he becomes secretary to Egerton. One of the reasons is probably because Egerton has already heard of Donne's fame. That is, people are talking about him in London society, right? Because he's writing these very witty poems. Okay? At that time, in 1598, is probably when he meets Anne Moore, Egerton's niece, who was living with Egerton. Okay? In 1601, Anne Moore is 17. So in 1598, she's 14. And Donne is 26. They marry in 1601 when she's 17 and he's 29. Okay? Several of Donne's poems kind of imply that they are autobiographical. One of them is about a man speaking to his lover and talking about, we got to keep this on the QT, on the hush and hush, because if your father finds out, all hell will break loose. Okay? Well, guess what? When her father found out, because this was not an approved marriage, they eloped, essentially. Okay? When her father found out, her father was Sir George Moore. He had Donne thrown in prison for 3 months. Okay? A variety of things kind of cascaded. One, he immediately lost his job. Okay? Two, he was thrown in prison. And here's the really cool thing. We have the letters written by George Moore to John Donne and from John Donne to George Moore. They're at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. Okay? These are a hoot to read. I mean, some of these are really interesting because some of them are written while Donne was in prison. Okay? And these are letters. The other day I mentioned, that Donne wrote verse letters. These aren't verse letters. These are letters. There are some verse letters also. Okay? So he gets married then and becomes unemployed. It pretty much is poor for the next 14 years. Okay? It's not to say your textbook kind of implies, that they live years of poverty and unemployment. Yes and no. He does become employed. He becomes another secretary to another Sir Robert Drury. Secretary here means, he's not keeping track of his appointments and such. It means Donne is writing material for him. That's what the secretary did. Not taking dictations writing, but using his experience. Sometimes thought Donne also had legal training, okay? But there's no evidence of that. What there is evidence is that he was very well educated. I mean, Donne was regarded in his day as pretty much a polymath. I mean, he knew everything there was to know, okay? Multiple languages, Latin, Greek, probably Hebrew, Italian, French, okay? I don't remember if he knew German or not. But he went to work for Sir Robert Drury, and he traveled with him some. He goes to the continent with him, etc., etc. Well, there are poems about a man speaking to his lover, and his lover is saying, I don't want you to leave. Or wife is saying, I don't want you to leave. He's saying, I have to leave. We'll talk about one of them. Don't worry. And there's some interesting biographical information that adds to our understanding of some of those poems. All right? 1615, he takes holy orders. I need to add in here. 1603, Queen Elizabeth dies. Okay? King James the Sixth of Scotland becomes James the First of England. All right? I did put up that background lecture for the Renaissance on D2L or emailed it to you, one of the two. King James fancies himself a scholar. He wrote a book on demonology, study of demons. Okay? He also takes a shining to John Donne. And he's the one who pretty much makes it impossible for Donne to get a real, quote-unquote, steady job, other than as secretary on and off to Sir Robert Drury. By roughly 1605 or so, 1608, I'm pretty sure is the hard and fast date, King James has said, I want John Donne to be a priest. I want him to take holy orders. That is an Anglican priest. Okay? Remember I said, Donne's raised Catholic. One of his earliest poems, that we think at least is pretty early, is Satire 3, which is in your book. It's not on the syllabus. I would strongly encourage you to read it, because Satire 3 is all about what's the true church. Is it the one in Rome? Is it the one in Geneva, the Reformed Church? Or is it here in London, the Anglican Church? And he essentially says, I don't know. But here's what's important. Search for it. The searching is the important thing. Some people date that poem as early as 1593. Okay? That shows Donne the seeker. Okay? And that he hasn't yet necessarily decided which way to go. Well, by the mid-1610s, 1608, 1610 or so, Donne kind of seems to have made a decision because he writes some pretty staunch anti-Catholic tracts. And tract is the right word. For example, he writes one thing called Ignatius's Conclave. And it's about St. Ignatius, the founder of the order of Jesuits. And Ignatius's conclave is in hell. He puts St. Ignatius in hell. Okay? A Catholic, believing Catholic, wouldn't do that. Okay? But we don't know that he's become Anglican yet. We do know, 1615, he's definitely Anglican. Why? Because he becomes an Anglican priest. And interestingly, then, he writes a letter to a friend. It's one of those verse letters. The friend is named Henry Goodyear. He writes a letter to him, and he says in the letter that he's getting ready to take holy orders, and therefore he needs to make a break from the past. A break from the past. So he asks for Goodyear to send him that little book of poems that he lent him. Okay? This is, we believe, a manuscript book of poetry that Donne wrote. Because he says, I am going to kind of issue a valediction of my past. A farewell saying. Okay? And he's going to publish this little book of poetry as kind of a means of saying, I'm done with all this from now on. I'm not going to write any more of this. He's not saying I'm not going to write any more poetry. He's saying I'm not going to write any more secular poetry. I'm not going to write any more, as a lot of Donne's poetry is, erotic poetry. I'm not going to write any more dirty gutter level poetry. Okay? I'm going to turn a new leaf, so to speak, and everything from here on is going to be quote unquote divine poetry, or poetry celebrating people's lives and deaths and such, and he does. From this point on, there's no more secular poetry that Donne writes. Everything becomes divine in origin. So that his first biographer, Isaac Walton, a contemporary of his, a friend of his, talks about Jack Donne, the rake of London, and Dr. Donne, Dean of St. Paul's. Right? Rake is an old term meaning someone who lived a really loose life. Okay? So, Walton says, pre-1615, he's kind of this. Post-1615, he was kind of this. Even though he didn't become Dean of St. Paul's until 1621. Okay? Go back to, he marries Anne Moore. She's 17. He's 29. They meet when she's 14. What would we call that today if the relationship starts then?
Statutory rape.
Yeah, statutory rape. Well, if it became sexual then. They married, so it wasn't rape. Unless, they had sex first and then, in which case it was rape, etc. But 1601 to 1617, They're married 16 years. In that 16 years, she has 12 children. Yeah, you figure out, how many months apart that is. It's only 7 of them live. There are no living descendants of John Donne today. Interestingly, I find this always interesting. There are no living descendants of John Donne today. There are no living descendants of William Shakespeare today. There are no living descendants of John Milton today. It's kind of like they spend all their genes on their writing, and everything else just kind of piddles away. I don't know if there are any, Chaucer descendants or Spencer descendants. It'd be interesting to check that. Or people kill them off for, a variety of reasons. So she dies in 1617. He writes a few poems about her death. 1621, as I said, he becomes Dean of St. Paul's. That is, he's in charge of St. Paul's Cathedral. Not the St. Paul's Cathedral that you see today. Not the St. Paul's Cathedral that Charles and Diana got married at. Will and what's her name? Kate Middleton got married at, etc. Okay? The original St. Paul's, which was all wooden, burned to the ground in 1666 in the Fire of London. Okay? But if you go to St. Paul's today, you can see the stone effigy that was made, I think it's marble, that was made of Donne after his death that survived the Great Fire. And you can see the fire burn marks on it. It's one of the few pieces that actually survived that. 1623, he has an illness where he thinks he's dying and writes these devotions upon emergent occasions, 23 of them. Very, very powerful. We're going to read part of one. And then he dies in 1631. He knows he's getting ready to die. 2 weeks before his death, he delivers a sermon called Death's Duel. It's one of the greatest sermons in the English language. It's relatively short because he doesn't have much time left. Okay? He knows he's dying, and he has the effigy kind of begun while he's still alive. How do we know? Because there's a portrait of Donne with his funeral, his burial shroud on him, done while he's still alive. That's kind of, some people say morbid, and some people say Donne has a fixation with death. Well, it's the one constant in life, as Hamlet comes to learn. So, all that being said, let's start with the Good Morrow. The Good Morrow is from what are called the Songs and Sonnets. Sonnet here doesn't mean the strict 14-line poem with a very specific rhyme scheme or structure. Okay? It just means little love song. And Donne's poems are usually divided into songs and sonnets, epicedes and obsequies, those are the funeral poems, epigrams, he wrote a whole slew of epigrams, elegies, he wrote a bunch of elegies, and divine poems. Pretty much those are the major groupings, right? So we have the Good Morrow. This is first published in 1633. It survives in a whole bunch of manuscript copies. Okay? I wonder by my troth what thou and I did till we loved. Were we not weaned till then, but sucked on country pleasures? There's one of those examples where in the manuscript, I've probably seen this a dozen times.
Oh, no.
Country is spelled that way in many of the manuscripts. But like I said, there's probably, I'd have to go back and check, 30 copies of this poem at least. Were we not weaned till then, but sucked on country pleasures childishly? Or snorted we in the seven sleepers' den? 'Twas so. In other words, yes, that's exactly what we did. But this, all pleasures fancies be. If ever any beauty I did see, which I desired and got, 'twas but a dream of thee. There's that image that I talked about when we were talking about Shakespeare's sonnets. Okay? What's the speaker essentially just said?
Like, he was with people, but he was, like, thinking of her.
Yay, baby. It was, they were all just what? images or dreams of you. They were foreshadowings, so to speak, of you. And now, what? Good morrow to our waking souls. Why? Because before, when we loved, not when we loved each other, when we loved other people. Notice the speaker is assuming that the beloved has also had other affairs or lovers. Okay? Before, we were like sleepers. That's why he says, the other loves I had and got, etc., they were but dreams of you. The implication is the flip side also. And the other lovers you had were dreams of me. But now what? Now we're awake. It's like we've left Plato's Shadowlands before we were in the Shadowlands. Now we're in the real world. Now we're in the real Narnia, so to speak. And now, good morrow to our waking souls, which watch not one another out of fear. In other words, I'm not keeping my eye on you because I think you're cheating on me. No. For love, all love of other sights controls. Love. What's he talking about? Not lust. Real love does what? Controls all other sights. He's saying, I don't need to worry about you. Why? Because I trust your love. It's Sonnet 116. Love does not what? Alter when it alteration finds, nor does it remove or move when the other one moves. No. Love makes one little room in everywhere. Well, what's the one little room? Read into the poem a little bit. The bedroom. It makes our bedroom what? Every bedroom. Once we sleep together, you will have slept with all men. I will have slept with all women. I don't need to go find anyone else. Let sea discoverers to new worlds have gone. Donne loves the image of discovering new worlds. He loves the images of maps and sea voyages and new territory. Okay? Let maps to others, worlds on worlds have shown. Right? Because a map is what? It's a representation of a world. Let us possess one world, each hath one and is one. I am a little world, you are a little world. When I have you, I have the world. When you have me, you have the world. What do we need maps for? What do we need new countries for? Okay? What's done, just done. A metaphysical conceit. What's meant by that? Right? Metaphysical. What are metaphysics in philosophy? Being. It's ontology. Okay? It's the study of beingness. Right? So this is a metaphysical conceit. The term doesn't come from Donne. It comes from it's either Dryden or Johnson. Dryden said that Donne's not good for women to read. It taxes their minds, Dryden suggested. Why? Because Donne, now I'm going to jump to Samuel Johnson, violently yokes together dissimilar things. Takes something way over here and something way over here and goes and binds them together. So what are the two dissimilar things Donne has yoked together here? How about lovers with maps? Those of you who are in love with someone, tell me how that person's a map. I don't mean a map for you to read. How is that person an other world? That's what Donne has done. Poem we're going to read in a few minutes. The Flea is probably one of the most famous metaphysical conceit poems, because there Donne links lovers with a whole bunch of things. For example, a blood-sucking flea. Hey baby, you're like a flea. Yeah, that's gonna get you a lot of, movement from a bar to a bedroom, right? Right? My face in thine eye, thine in mine appears. Well, how? How could my face appear in somebody else's eye? What do you have to do? You have to go up and look real closely, right? It's the reflection of your face. Okay? Here's another metaphysical conceit. Because later in another poem, Donne uses that image of my face in another's eye and that person's face in my eye as what? A means of propagation. I have begotten myself in her. She has begotten herself in me. In other words, this is like eye sex. Okay? My face in thine eye, thine in mine appears. In true plain hearts do in the faces rest. True hearts, he says what? They can be seen right here. Well, remember the one sonnet by Shakespeare? 93 or 94? Like a deceived husband, I suppose thou art true, he says. That is, the speaker is saying, I'm like a deceived husband by supposing you are true. Supposing obviously means you're not being true to me, but he says, your face can't lie to me. Done. True plain hearts do in the faces rest. And where can we find two better hemispheres? This is one hemisphere. This is one hemisphere. Without sharp north, without declining west. Whatever dies was not mixed equally. An old, ancient Greek notion, Aristotle, essentially said, one of the reasons we all die is the stuff we are made out of isn't mixed perfectly. If the four elements, air, earth, fire, water, were mixed in us perfectly, we would never die. But it's not. And because it is mixed imperfectly, some of us have more of one element than another. And those of us who have more air get termed flighty, airhead. Those of us who have more fire, hothead, angry. Those of us who have more water, phlegmatic, depressed, etc. Okay? Whatever dies was not mixed equally. If our two loves be one, that is, my love for you, your love for mine, if they're one, why? And for this reason a man shall leave his parents and the two shall become one flesh. Or, notice he's kind of saying, maybe they don't. Or, thou and I love so alike that none do slacken, none can die. If your love is like my love, then what?
The love can't die.
The love can't die. So if the love does die, whose fault is it? It's not mine. I mean, I loved you totally. It must have been your fault because your mixture of love in the one wasn't equal. So, this poem can be read two very, very different ways. This can be a beautiful love poem. There can also be a way of accusing the other person for being false if the love dies. Look at from there. Skip women's constancy because that's not a positive poem from a feminist perspective. Look at the canonization. Okay, canonization. What does that term imply? What kind of language is it?
It's like kind of like Catholic.
Yeah, it's religious language. Who gets canonized?
Whoever's like a part of the official doctrine.
No. Saints. Canonization is the raising of someone from the status of schlub to saint. Okay? It's a process. You got to, within the Catholic Church, you got to have the miracles confirmed, et cetera, et cetera. You got to be beatified first, then you go on up until you're finally canonized. So, the canonization. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. Or chide my palsy or my gout, my 5 gray hairs, a ruined fortune flout. With wealth your state, your mind with arts improve. Notice, we've not had a period yet. This is all part of one sentence. Take you a course, get you a place, observe his honor or his grace, in the king's real or his stamped face. Contemplate. Finally, we get a long pause. What you will approve, so you will let me lose. Okay, so let's look at that stanza. For God, shut up, woman. That's what the speaker's saying. Just zip it and let me love. Just psh. Okay, she's not going to shut up. How do you know? Or chide my palsy, twitchiness, or my gout, my 5 gray hairs, a ruined fortune flout, that is, speak ill of these things. With wealth your state, with your mind, with arts improve. So, improve your state, your status with wealth. Improve your mind with the liberal arts. I know it's a foreign idea to our society. Take you a course. It's kind of like go to university or get you a place. What kind of a place? A position, a job, a preferment. Observe his honor or his grace, that is a judge, a religious leader. In the king's real, the king's face, or his stamped face on a piece of money. Okay? Contemplate. Think of all these things. What you will approve. In other words, whatever. I don't care what you do. Whatever you want. You want to talk about my 5, fine. Talk about my 5 gray hairs. Talk about my palsy. Talk about blah, 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 blah. Just let me love you. Alas, alas, who's injured by my love? What merchant ships have my sighs drowned? That is an example of a Petrarchan conceit. Okay? Another word for conceit is idea, if you want, or image, or trope, right? It's a Petrarchan conceit. Why? Because it comes from the Italian poet Petrarch, creator of sonnets. And Petrarch wrote a whole series of sonnets to a woman he loved named Laura. Okay? And in these, he creates what become later conventions. His sighs for Laura, because of his unrequited love, became rivers that drowned the towns. His sighs became hurricanes that blew down the trees and everything. His tears became rivers that drowned the town. Her smile, when she smiled at him, was like the sun bursting from behind a cloud. So he gives us these images that pretty much all sonneteers follow until you get to about this period. As we saw with Shakespeare, Shakespeare takes some of those images and turns them on their heads. Why? Because Laura was one with beautiful golden hair. Well, what did Shakespeare's personas mistress's hair look like? Kinky black wires. He takes the Petrarchan image and turns it on its head. Why? Because by the 1590s, it's old. It's stale. So, what merchant ships have my sighs drowned? Who says my tears have overflowed his ground? When did my colds a forward spring remove? When did the heats which my veins fill add one more to the plaguey bill? The plaguey bill, the bill of death. How many people died last night from the plague, Soldiers find wars, and lawyers find out still there means always, or continuous, or constantly. Litigious men, which quarrels move, though she and I do love. Even if she and I love, guess what? Soldiers are still going to find wars to fight, and lawyers are still going to find people who want to sue other people. Call us what you will. We are made such by love. Who's the speaker speaking to? It's not, so you will let me love. It's not, hold your tongue, woman. The speaker's now moved away from addressing the beloved to a much broader audience. Call us what you will. We are made such by love. Call her, me another fly. How's that for your metaphysical conceit? Ladies, do you really want your lover calling you a fly? When you think of what flies do and where they go, well, your gloss tells you a butterfly or moth. Really? Is that a whole lot better? So, I'm a fly, she's a fly. We're tapers too. Candles. I'm a candle, she's a candle. And at our own cost die. Our own cost. Our own spending of ourselves. There's that Renaissance notion of, you die a little bit every time you have sex. Okay? And we in us find the eagle and the dove. Symbols of masculine strength and feminine gentleness, now united in the lovers. Yeah, well, eagles sometimes do what with doves? They eat them. They swoop down, gone. The phoenix riddle hath more wit by us. And that's Donne's way of saying, the two flies, the two tapers, the eagle and the dove, the phoenix riddle. That's an even better image for us. Why? Because we two being one are it. So, to one neutral thing, both sexes fit. One neutral thing, so here's one sex, here's another sex. Together they're what? Sexless. It's neither male nor female. We die and rise the same, improve mysterious by this love. Well, that's why they're like the phoenix. What does the phoenix do? Every 500 years, poof, it dies. And then what does it do? It rises again. Okay? We can die by it, if not live by love. And if unfit for tombs and hearse our legend be, it will be fit for verse. That is, if unfit to be inscribed on a tomb, it'll be fit for verse. How so? And if no piece of chronicle reprove, there's that Shakespeare sonnet kind of in the back of your minds, we'll build in sonnets pretty rooms. That is, we'll build in our little sonnets little pretty rooms. As well, a well-wrought urn becomes the greatest ashes as half-acre tombs. Do you really need a big, massive mausoleum for your ashes? Won't a very finely wrought urn do just as well? And by these, notice what verse is now transposed to. Hymns. And by these hymns, all shall approve us, canonized for love. Well, what are hymns? songs of praise and glory and supplication. So people will now read these verses, which have become hymns, and they're hymns to what? Saints of love. And thus invoke us. People will invoke us. Oh, help us, heavenly saints of love. You whom reverend love made one another's hermitage. That is, you too, he made her his hermitage, the place where he dwelt. She made him her hermitage, the place where she dwelt. Why? Because the two became one. You to whom love was peace, that now is rage. How was love peace for the two that are being addressed? What's meant by peace? This is what's meant by peace. They fall in love, let's say here. Notice the term, fall in love. Do you ever really like to fall anywhere?
No.
So why do you fall in love? Why don't you step into love? Why don't you jump into love? Why does it fall in love? Because it's like you have no control over it. It's an accident. It's Cupid sitting there, you know, playing Stevie Wonder with a loaded weapon. It's just not a nice idea. So they fell in love, and their love was peace that now is rage. Okay, so how many of you are in love currently and maybe had a little spat with your lover in the last, I don't know, I won't say hour, because you know most of the time, day, week, month, etc. Well, what happens when you fall into a spat? And then what happens when you make up from that spat? You don't just come right here, right? You go way up here. That's love now is rage. It's the ups and downs. But their love was peace. That now is rage. Who did the whole world's soul contract, and drove into the glasses of your eyes, so made such mirrors and such spies, that they did all to you epitomize. They, your eyes, did to you all epitomize. So when he looked into her eyes, he was seeing all women's eyes. She became what for him? The model. There's that Platonic idea again. She is the very ideal of womanhood. He is the ideal of manhood. Countries, towns, courts. I look at her, she's all countries, towns, what? Is that because she's well built, like a country, town, or court? No. He sees every place in her. I didn't need to go look for a wonderful thing, because it's right in front of me. And so what do? We who invoke them, we beg from above a pattern of your love. Show us the pattern. That's what saints do. Saints are patterns for life. Give us the pattern. Because what's the pattern you don't want to follow? Romeo and Juliet? Lancelot and Guinevere? Tristan and Isolde? Why not? Dead, dead, dead. These two canonized, made saints. Okay? Now go to 920. So he can write this beautiful love poem, and in the next moment, he writes the Flea. Okay? Now, the Flea, and many of Donne's songs and sonnets, were probably written for one purpose. These are not pickups. He's not going to the bars and saying, okay, let me try out this latest one. They read that way, but they're probably written simply to show off his mental agility. That is, Donne's kind of calling over Ben Jonson. Well, Ben, take a look at this. Tell me what you think. And Ben's going, damn. Donne, the delight of Phoebus and all the muses. I can never come up with that kind of stuff. Why? Because you're not John Donne, you know. So we know that there were not literal competitions where, you know, there would be money writing, but there were writers in Elizabethan England were competitive. And they were trying to outdo each other in terms of mental and intellectual gymnastics. Okay? Donne probably won most of those. He does some gymnastics that we still sit there and just go, what the hell is he talking about? The flea. Mark but this flea and mark this. Mark means take note of. Look at this flea. Okay? So set the background. You have a man speaking with a woman. She is the person being addressed. They are somewhere probably private or discreet. And he says, look at this flea and look in this. That is, look at the flea and then delve deeper. Let's go into what the flea really means. And mark in this how little that which thou deniest me is. Okay, so what is that which thou deniest me? Sex. Look at this flea and look how little it really is the sex you're denying me, or how of little significance it is. Now, what should she do immediately right there? Well, if it's so insignificant, why do you keep pestering me for it? You know, but she doesn't. So, it sucked me first, and you have to bear in mind, in the Renaissance, often, when you have the letter S at the beginning of a word, it looks like that. It's the long S. What's the difference between that and the first letter of the word flee? Well, in the Renaissance, it's pretty much this. But there are lots of instances where you have the first letter of a word, like flee, and it looks like that. Because the person did not put the little crossbar. So it's all context. So that when Shakespeare says, there where the bee sucks, suck I, in manuscript, okay, there's probably a lot of, chortling going on when people are reading that, as there was here, okay? Mark how little that which thou deniest me is. It sucked me first and now sucks thee, okay? Your gloss. Me it sucked first in many manuscripts. That's interesting, because I worked on this poem, and I can't think of a single one that had me it sucked first. Anyways, and in this flea are two bloods mingled be. Now, later on in the poem, he's going to describe the flea, and it's not going to sound like a flea. It's going to sound like what we would think of as a good old tick, because it swells with blood. Fleas don't usually swell with blood. Okay? I mean, they can. You can get a big flea, but it's still really small. Ticks? Oh, yeah. Especially here in the South. I've pulled them off my dog, or they've been almost as big as my thumb before. So, it sucked me first, and now sucks thee, and in this flea are two bloods mingled be. So what does that mean? Our bloods are mingled in this flea. This is the mixing of bodily fluids. He's creating an image of what? Sex. Thou knowest this cannot be said, a sin, nor shame, nor loss of maidenhead. 1, we haven't sinned. 2, there's no shame to be held. 2, you haven't lost your virginity. Yet this flea enjoys before it woo. It didn't even have to take you out for dinner, movies, buy you flowers, get you car. It just, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am kind of a thing. And pampered swells with one blood made of two, and this, alas, is more than we would do. What does that, and this, alas, is more than we would do mean? What's he saying? He's not going to what? No, not that. He is saying, the flea gets to mingle our bloods together. Let me too. He is saying that. He's saying the flea swells as a result of their blood mixing, and this, alas, is more than we would do. Don't worry, baby, I'm not going to knock you up. You're not going to get pregnant. That's what he means. Yeah, so can you imagine this at a bar? Guy sidles up to you at a bar lady and says, hey, baby. And, kind of says, what's going to happen? He's probably not going to walk out. Oh, stay 3 lives and 1 flea spare. What has happened between stanza 1 and stanza 2? Now, the whole poem kind of is called, it's an apostrophe poem. Why? Not because there's an apostrophe somewhere. It directly addresses someone who doesn't respond at all. Okay? It's also like a dramatic monologue, if you've ever read any of Robert Browning's, like To My Last Duchess. Okay? But the person being addressed has, between stanza 1 and stanza 2, done something. What has she done? Well, yeah, smarty pants. She pulls that flea off. Let's imagine it as a tick. So she's got that swollen tick between thumbnail and index finger. Stay 3 lives and 1 flea spare. How 3 lives? My blood, your blood, the flea's blood. Where we almost, nay, more than married are. How can you be more than married? Either it's like being pregnant, right? Either you are or you aren't. It's not, I'm 25% there. No. Well, it's not like being pregnant. If Henry VIII is any example. Because you can get married and not, or let's go back, Edward the Confessor. You can get married and not what? Louder. Consummate that marriage. You can go through the whole wedding ceremony, man and wife, death till death do you part, blah, 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 blah. What does Sir Gawain have to do? Not Sir Gawain. What does the knight in the Wife of Bath's tale have to do with the lowly lady? Sleep with her. She's like, it's just like all knights are. They don't want to. And he's like, no, it's just you're so ugly and hideous. You can get married and never consummate the marriage. That's cause for an annulment right there in the Catholic Church. Why? The marriage was never carried through. So we are more than married. How more than married? Because our bloods are mingling in this flea. This flea, to make the metaphysical conceit clear, is you and I. Honey, you're a flea, and I'm a flea, and guess what? We are the same flea. Why? Because the two shall become one. And this, the flea, talk about straining credulity, our marriage bed and marriage temple is. He's not talking about a flea bag hotel. He's saying the flea is our marriage bed. And the flea is our marriage temple. Though parents grudge and you. See, I think that's talking about her parents. That this poem, Donne is kind of hearkening back. But it could be any parents, really, especially if you're talking about, Shakespearean stuff. Though parents grudge in you, we're met and cloistered in these living walls of jet. One of the days when I was working on the Dunbury Orm, I was sitting in Gary's office. He was the director. I was sitting in his office and I'm scrolling through microfilms and looking for stuff. And I found a copy of The Flea that did not have those 2 lines. There's an index of Donne's poetry, and this copy was not in that index. Nobody had seen it before. So I, dutifully transcribed it and everything. Why would those 2 lines be left out? Well, because they could be read as being dangerous, going against one's parents. Though parents grudge and we're met and cloistered in these living walls of jet. Cloistered. Who lives in cloisters? Nuns and monks. Though use make you apt to kill me. Does that gloss help at all? Though habit make you apt to kill me? What kind of habit? Louder?
Nun's habit?
No.
The habit to kill flea?
No. What do lovers habitually engage in? Sex! That's an idiotic gloss. It should show sex. Though sex make you apt to kill me. Why? Kill me again. And again. And again. And again.
Because they think that they're
Because it's orgasm, yeah. It's the Renaissance notion where they pun on the image of killing and dying. Okay? Though we die and rise again, and Donne could have put, and again, and again, and again, and again. Let not to that self-murder added be. Because self-murder is what? What's the one-word phrase for that? Suicide. See, that's one I'd never thought of there. But as soon as I asked that, I thought, somebody's going to say masturbation. Though use make you apt to kill me, let not to that. Yeah, I don't think it fits in the context. Because talking about killing me, let not to that self-murder added be, and sacrilege, because he's emphasizing the threeness. The masturbation part wouldn't really work with that. I don't think. Okay? Let not to that self-suicide. That's what he's getting at with self-suicide, self-murder. And by the way, Donne wrote a book called, Be a Thanatos. Greek, not Latin. The title is, what's it mean? Self-death. He wrote a book, essentially arguing for why suicide should be allowed. Okay, suicide is, according to the Catholic Church, the unforgivable sin, the sin against the Holy Spirit. Why? You can't repent. You're saying, sorry, God, my problems are too great for even you to solve. And you can't go, sorry, God, I repent, and then kill yourself. Because you can't repent for a sin you haven't yet committed. And once you kill yourself, it's too late. And sacrilege, 3 sins and kill. Well, how is that sacrilegious to kill 3? Trinity? That's how. You're killing the idea of threeness. Cruel and sudden, so what has she done? Pop! Yeah, ew. Because cruel and sudden hast thou since purpled thy nail in blood of innocence. Now, I could be way off on this, but I think Donne has just given us a biblical illusion. Purpled blood of innocence. Well, what did Herod do once he found out he was tricked by the 3 wise men? He ordered all the children 2 years and under in the area of Bethlehem slaughtered. Purpled, kingly, royal. In the church, both the Church of the East and the West, those are called the royal innocents. Why? Because they kind of died in place of Christ, so that later on Christ would die in place of them, etc. Okay? In blood of innocence. So what else? What's the literal blood of innocence? The flea. And my blood and your blood. Why? Wherein could this flea guilty be? Except in that drop which it sucked from thee. So, why'd you kill the flea? Well, because she would probably say, because you said our bloods were mixing in it. So, yet thou triumphst. It's almost like she's doing a little victory dance. Yeah, buddy, look how smart you are, you know. And sayest that thou find'st not thyself nor me the weaker now. You've killed my blood in the flea. I should be a little bit less. You've killed your blood in the flea. You should be a little bit less. And yet you say, I'm not any weaker. You're not any weaker. 'Tis true. Then learn how false fears be. And this is where he tightens the noose around, the beloved's proverbial neck. Just so much honor when thou yieldst to me, when you sleep with me, will waste, as this flea's death took life from thee. How much honor will you lose? How much life did you lose in killing the flea? You don't feel any less life? That's how much honor you'll lose. So, is this a serious, seductive poem? No. He's teasing her, but what else is it?
For the last two ones, more, so why not?
Okay, it's possibly.
So you won't lose anything. That's a good-
Talk about mental gymnastics. He's just created in 27 lines kind of a syllogism. An Aristotelian syllogism. Premise 1, premise 2, premise 3. Therefore, my blood in the flea, your blood in the flea swells. You don't feel any less life, you don't feel any less honor. Therefore, give it up, baby. Now, it might be disgusting, on its surface level, but you got to admit, damn, that is witty. I mean, that's violently yoked together dissimilar ideas. Okay. 1047. The flea. Okay, now let's jump to a much prettier one. A valediction forbidding mourning. What's a valediction?
It's a goodbye.
It's a goodbye. Okay. My daughter's getting ready to graduate high school, and I'm probably going to have to listen to, 40 freaking valedictory addresses. Ridiculous. A valediction, this is the valediction forbidding mourning. Donne wrote 3 valedictions. Poems titled A Valediction. Forbidding mourning, forbidding weeping. I can't remember the third one. Okay? According to Isaac Walton, the guy I said was his first biographer, Donne wrote this poem shortly before he had to leave England to go to the continent with Sir Robert Drury. Okay? He wrote it to his wife, who was pregnant at the time. Okay? And according to Walton, she had premonitions. Something bad was going to happen while he was gone. And according to Walton, it just happened to be on this trip that Donne was away that Anne More Donne delivered a stillborn child. Okay? As virtuous men pass mildly, how do virtuous men pass mildly away? Silently. They are not Dylan Thomas's persona and do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the... No. Silently. And whisper to their souls to go, while some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now, and some say no. That is, the friends who are standing or sitting around the deathbed go, is he dead yet? I don't know. Can't hear anything. They just drift off. So let us melt. What's being compared there? What's the conceit there? The us are like a virtuous man. Well, what is melting in the virtuous man? It's not his body melting, not like that. It's the body and the soul separating. So let us separate. And make no noise. Shh. No weeping, no crying. No tear floods nor sigh tempests move. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. Profanation, laity. What kind of language is that?
Like church language.
It's church language. It's religious language.
Profane means to make common. Laity, like the regular.
Profane means to make common. The laity are the uninitiates. Okay? The clergy are those who are the ordained. Okay? The speaker is saying, we are like the clergy. Well, you could go back to the canonization. All right? So it would be a profanation of our joys. It would profane our joys. To tell who? Those people out there about our love. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. But trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. Moving of the earth. What is that? This is a much better poem to teach in California than it is in Tennessee. Earthquakes. Okay? Brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did, why, how, because they didn't understand fault lines, and more importantly, meant. What does it mean that there are these big quakes? But trepidation of the spheres, trepidation, movement of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. And there's that Ptolemaic conception of the universe again. What's he talking about? These are the spheres. What do they all do? They all move. It's the movement of the spheres that produces what's called the music of the spheres. And if our hearing were ever attuned to the music of the spheres, according to Pythagoras, I think it is Pythagoras, what would happen? You would immediately die, and your soul would be ravished, taken up to the Empyrean. It would be more beautiful than can be experienced on earth. Okay? Trepidation of the spheres is the movement of these. Why is that greater, though innocent?
Because you can't feel it from earth.
Okay, it's possible. It's greater because that's a bigger sphere than this is. But it's innocent. This is probably an indication of when the poem is written, or at least a date after which the poem is written. Anybody know when Copernicus's ideas were proven true? 1610. Galileo published his findings that said Copernicus is right. And fairly soon after that, Galileo said, oops, sorry, I was wrong. Why? Because the church said, take it back while he was in prison, so he took it back. And then later on he said, no, I was right to begin with. So in 1610, Galileo publishes Copernicus is right. What does that mean? There is none of this. The heliocentric view comes into vogue. Okay? That the earth moves around the sun. And Venus moves around the sun. And Mars and Jupiter move around the sun. Okay? That's why trepidation of the spheres greater is innocent. That's why astrology is meaningless. It doesn't matter under what star you were born or under what planet you were born. Read King Lear. And Edmund says about his father, he's an old fool, thinking that because I was conceived under the goat, Capricorn, therefore I would be a rotten scoundrel no matter when I was born. Why? Because I like being a rotten scoundrel. Okay? Dull, sublunary lovers love. So here's the earth, here's the moon. Right? Everything from the moon to the earth is characterized by one thing. We saw this in The Wanderer. What's the theme of The Wanderer? Mutability. Impermanence. Change. Everything outside the realm of the moon, it's all eternal, unchanging. Comets, meteors, all that kind of stuff, within the orbit of the moon. Okay? Dull, sublunary lovers love. So, people whose love is governed or dictated by existing in this area is what? Whose soul is sense. That is, the animating spirit of their love is sense. He doesn't mean like common sense. He means what? Sense. Hearing, tasting, smelling, seeing, touching. It is sensory. It is sensual. Cannot admit absence. Why? Well, if you take the body that I want to sense in all the ways and remove that body, I have nothing to sense anymore. There is nothing sensual for me. And if that sense is the animating spirit of my love, then what is my love going to do? It's going to start looking around for something else. Because it doth remove the it, absence, those things which elemented it. Eyes, nose, ears, breast, hair, lip, all that stuff. But we, you and I, by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is. It's almost like she asked him, honey, why do you love me? I don't know. Enter assured of the mind. There we are, Sonnet 116. We care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. It doesn't matter for us if your eyes aren't in front of me, your lips aren't in front of me, your hands aren't in front of me. No, our two souls, I always forget to bring a compass. Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. And gold can be beaten so thin you could use it for windows. That is, you could see through it. Why? Because it's a malleable metal. It's not like steel. Steel will shatter. Okay? He says, okay, let's use another image. Our two souls, if they be two, they're like stiff twin compasses are two. So, his soul, her soul. You do a compass and you just leave it like that, and what happens? Well, you could turn that in circles. You could go around like that, and what's the ray going to do? It's going to come right around. It's going to make a perfect circle, right? But what happens when you have it like this? These back on so they don't dry out. What happens when this one has to leave? Like the speaker is suggesting. Does it just go like this? No, because then it won't make a circle, right? Because this isn't touching the paper. So what does this one have to do? It has to follow after it. If they be two, they are two, so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. If this one has got to move away, then this one has got to hearken after it. And though it, this, in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens, calling, that's what hearkens means, after it, and grows erect as that come home. Such wilt thou be to me. You will be, the speaker says, my fixed foot. You will be, Sonnet 116, the star to my ever-wandering bark. Like the other foot, to me, who must like the other foot obliquely run. Thy firmness, you're staying put. You're staying here. Will what? make me come home. It's your staying here that will do what? Draw me back. Now, Isaac Walton said she wanted to accompany him. Okay? And Donne said, no, I need you to stay here. And that's when she related, premonition, etc. Don't worry, everything will be fine. And while he's gone, she has a stillborn child. Okay? But if you take all of that out, all the Walton biographical stuff, because we have no proof that that's the case. That's just what Walton said occurred. And look at the poem just on its own. This is one of the greatest love poems in the English language. And yet it is almost never included in 100 greatest love poems of the English language. Instead you get, let me compare you to a summer, how shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Which isn't a love poem. Okay. And we'll stop there because we don't have time to do more. So when we come back, however, we're going to do the ecstasy. And if I remember to print out the thing of the Holy Sonnets, I will. So paper due Tuesday.